Well, we speak in the language that we hope they can understand. In terms of imagery, of definitions of that which is meaningful. You know, sometimes people say, well, what do we mean by so-and-so? What does so-and-so mean? As if it had some independent existence of how people and why people use a word the way they do. But what matters is, how will it sound to the person I speak it to? And if I don't bear that in mind, but only use it in the way it sounds to me, and there's a mismatch between them and me, well, we've had it. We've just got chaos, haven't we? I say something and you hear it differently, and he hears it differently still. And the Barney goes on, and we look like very able philosophers that are living in chaos and continue to live in chaos. Each speaking the same language, but having a variety of different meanings to whoever's hearing it. Now, if I'm giving a story to a kiddie, I don't talk to him as though I'm talking to an adult. It's once upon a time. I'm giving the story as if it were a reality. And I have images and characters that are meaningful and bold and crisp and clear to my hearer. And I try to judge the age as to what they can imagine and what they can't. So there's Little Red Riding Hood, and there's a wolf, and there's and so forth. There might be gnomes and fairies. If it's the modern world, I might do it in terms of good and bad people. And I might introduce things like aliens even. Heroes. The writer knows it's not a literalism, but he also knows what he wants to communicate. And he's trying to communicate it in the fashion that his hearers may both understand and find acceptable. Will cause them to think in a way nearer to that of the storyteller. So I'm speaking it as a literalism in their understanding, that they take on the ideas. But the taking on of the ideas should give them an advance in understanding, which changes what they can hear. They come nearer to the blessing I want them to have. But of course, if they take the story as absolute and correct and right and perfect, well, it wasn't. It was in the form that they could hear, given their immaturity, their imperfection, their inability. So there's always a value beneath what's in the story, what's in the account. The story indicates the direction in which you should go, in as far as you can go in your present state. But when you've gone a certain distance along that way, well, you will see more clearly, hopefully. Some will know what the next few steps should be, and will teach the others in words that they can hear, the language and imagery that they are now with. And we will say this is a terrific advance. But it's not an advance for all time. Again, it's just another step in the right direction, hopefully. And if it's in the wrong direction, well, such people may get wiped out. This is the fear with pacifism, isn't it? It seems a good idea. If I practice it, do I find some malevolent enemy just walks all over me, and that's the end of me, and the end of pacifism, perhaps yet again. So yes, he was a lovely chap, but it was untenable in the world that he was in. So we can see or imagine in our historicity, or find that the Persians took on a pacifist structure, or lack of structure, you could say, for some 30 years before the fall, the invasion of their enemies that was successful. And then we heard no more. Did that make pacifism wrong as an individual way? No. Was it viable for all the population in a society? No, they get wiped out. In fact, even individually they may get wiped out. You know, Jesus doesn't live to a great age. The Christian martyrs are those that got wiped out. So people might start looking at such experiences or examples to think that, yes, it is quite wonderful being a saint, but I'm certainly not risking it. Get out of my way, I'm going to fight. Does that make them right? No, only from the point of view of survival in this world, but that may not be why we're in this world. You're not in the classroom to be a schoolboy eternally for the whole of your existence, perhaps an eternal existence. You're going to leave anyway. It's best to leave at, if you like, the age of 16. Not at the age of 95 if you get that far. We don't want lifelong schoolboys. Or should I say, a schoolboy environment is no place for an adult. And you need to become an adult. Of course, I'm speaking in a language that in some sense makes some sort of sense. But of course schools don't have kids that graduate by being killed. That's a nonsense, of course. And we know that, we take that for granted. And if we get someone that doesn't, and thinks that we should kill all children that pass their exams, well, I mean, that would just be a bizarre stupidity, wouldn't it? Do you see, I mean, we can always get some literalist come along and play havoc with the original intention. I mean, it's so blatantly obvious as to be trite, isn't it? And of course we don't mean that. You know, if God appears as a blinding light, well, I don't mean a blinding light because nobody wants to be blind, and how would that be a blessing if it blinded you? I didn't mean it literally. You know, use your head. It's a figure of speech. It's I don't want some literalist to say that God appears as a blinding light because he likes blinding people, presumably. I mean, that would be absurd, wouldn't it? You can't not be a Gnostic in that sense. You have to hear, but be thinking, what does this mean? I know what it means literally, in some ways, in what he's saying, but perhaps he doesn't mean it blinds at all. He means it's an incredibly bright light. But he almost certainly doesn't mean that blinds people. It's inconsistent with the rest of the story. So we Gnostically, trivially, but Gnostically even so, discern what the speaker actually means. But of course, some kids don't do that. They still think Father Christmas comes down the chimney, although it looks blatantly unlikely given what the chimney is and what people are in size and so on. And they start to reason, how could he possibly get round all the houses in the country in one night? But you could still pick up there's something lovely about the idea of Father Christmas and this older chap bringing presents to children. How kind. Well, presents to the whole household, perhaps. The fact that you haven't worked out how he lives and what he does the rest of the year, and how he could achieve what he's supposed to achieve, doesn't interest the child. He just picks up on the right bit, which is it's a time to celebrate, and there are free presents that come from people you scarcely know of. Auntie gives you a toy crane or something, or a doll or whatever it is. And Daddy may even dress up as Father Christmas in some households, and it's not the true Father Christmas, but you know what it all means. The kid here becomes Gnostic. You're training him to be Gnostic. In that very basic sense of a contempt really for literalism. It's the Gnostic meaning that counts. And you're trying to train children to be like that in a sense. And this is invaluable too in science and so on. That I see an effect in the world. I observe something. And I imagine a structure, a causality that would anticipate such a consequence, such an effect that I'm watching and seeing. I never know if this theory as to the causal structure is in some literal sense true. I only know that it seems to best account for the effects I see in the world to date. Which is, of course, the foundation of I never actually prove anything. I just account for it in a predictable way, and this seems to be the best way of predicting things at the minute. Until someone comes along and has a better way, and we forget the old theory and adopt the new as being the most useful method of predicting the outcome that we to date have. So I never literally know in that sense. I just trust. This seems to be the best theory. Do I have the truth? Well, I don't know. It seems to be the best I can do at the minute. If we carry that realization to our religion, then we start to be picky and choosy as to what religion we follow and what doctrines and so forth, and critical and of what is right and what isn't. Discerning, you could say. We end up as much more able, ideally, to handle our world. So if we then come to a conviction that a particular set of theories results in us being wiped out, and we could say that set of theories might be exampled, say, by pacifism, then we may take on board that pacifism isn't the way to go, is imagining some causal relationship. It doesn't seem to give the cause that we see and observe. Namely a happiness and a success, but death and annihilation by the enemy. Because, of course, our goal is survival in this world. But perhaps your goal is not that. Perhaps your goal is a survival in another world, in another dimension, a spiritual dimension, because perhaps you have the view that who you are is not simply a material body functioning and reacting to the forces that are apparent in this world, but that who you are is something other than the material, and it has an existence that actually dynamizes the material, but has an existence in itself, whereas the material only has life when such a presence is in it. Now your goals are different. It's not necessarily to survive with a long life. After all, you're going to die anyway by some reasonably predictable age. You'll be dead. But to have a life thereafter. Is this valuing reasonable? And the reply is, in some sense, well, in terms of what? In terms of what is imposed in this world, or in terms of what you think the consequences may be in some other dimension, the non-material, which is perhaps the domain of personhood, and perhaps an eternal personhood that can experience joy or grief, pain or pleasure, joy or sadness and regret. And you may be addressed to putting those experienced dimensions right. In other words, you don't like, say, living with the notion of guilt or fear or boredom even. You like being creative. So you start to surmise what might achieve this. What do I need to do? Purpose. And how? And if I wish to communicate this to others that don't have these deliberations, I may put it in a way that is meaningful to them. I may create a religion. that will help them advance in their realization to what mine is. I may be successful in this, or they may take it entirely the wrong way and get the most appalling results in terms of this world. They'll be charging off on a crusade, or the Inquisition, or a witch hunt, or a domination of the planet, or some hero concept that's not what I take to be good at all. Or some concept of nobility which is completely skew-whipped compared to what I think of as noble and awesomely good. They may take ridiculous acts of self-sacrifice and heroic acts of danger that I never dreamt they'd be so lacking in understanding of what I meant. Welcome to the history of the world. Does it have a good consequence with God? Yeah, possibly. It means they may experience good and evil and learn by such. The stupidity of some things, the appalling death, carnage and cost of some mistakes, and learn to avoid them like the plague. Overall, it may be a tremendous blessing. Myopically looking at any one circumstance, it might be a disaster. How you evaluate will depend on what your view of the eternal is, or the transitory, whichever you think is the reality, or the choice of such, if that's what you think is a reality. Thank you, Dad.